All right, here is my patch walkthrough for my most recent patch that I'm calling Time Loop in VCV Rack. So I'm going to walk you through it in order that I created the voices. It's kind of all over the place, but I had a lot of fun with it. I started it off really wanting to explore what can be done with this Instruo TSL. It's one I'm considering getting in person eventually, so I wanted to kind of see what it did. And some cool stuff. Other hero of this one is this new Lazy Susan quantizer. I was a big fan of the Repelson, I think it was, in the older version of VCVRack that hasn't been ported over yet, but this one is doing its job wonderfully. You can see I've got a scale in here, and then I've got a switch that's actually changing between two different quantized scales, and it's got CVs and then triggers that trigger when that note changes. So lots of fun there. So let's begin with this first main voice right here. This was the first one I did. This top row of this sequencer is getting 16th notes from my clock. Simple as that. One other thing to note, this guy is on trigger mode. That made a big difference later on with with my hi-hat layer, but it was an important thing that I stumbled across, that this could go to trigger mode. So this sequencer is getting 16th notes in, volt per octave sent into my quantizer, that is being controlled by this switch over here, who's getting a divided by, I don't know, 16 it looks like clock, because I ran out of inputs on my main clock, which is just changing between nothing and a fixed voltage that takes my quantizer to the next scale, which gives these cool chord changes that happen. So though that CV coming out of here is heading into the Instruo, and then the trigger, you see it go in the opposite direction, but that's because it's going to a mute first so that I can turn it off at the source, and then it's coming back from that mute over to these two trigger inputs. So I'm actually controlling that with an external controller, just because it's easier to mute and unmute multiple things if I've got buttons in front of me. So I'll just mute that as I'm talking. So volt per octave into the TSL, and then the triggers that are being triggered every time I get a new note there, going to these two AD envelopes. I've got 4 outputs here going into this mixer, and then the mixer out into VCF, and each of them have their own CV. For this, 2 of them I use this longer decay, 2 of them I use this shorter decay on these AD envelopes. The shorter decay is also the one that I used into my filter here. So let's listen to this a little bit so we can hear the different voices that I mixed together into this one voice. So if I take this mix out, here's one of the voices. This guy right here, triangle. This is the wave shaping one. Much harsher. Here's a sub on 1 octave down on square wave. And then this guy, the pulse width modulation output thing. So just an interesting sound. Mix it all together and we get this. Again, 2 of those being attenuated by the AD. This AD, the other 2, and the VCF controlled by this shorter decay there. All being sent into Chronoblob for the decay that's happening here, that's being synced by the main clock. So that was the first voice I created. I really liked the chord changes that happened in here. This was mostly random in my creation here, and I'm not using the probability gates that on this particular one as we went. So that's voice number 1. The second one I made was our bass drum down here in Trummer, just being triggered directly from the clock source after it went through my little gate muter up top. and then out to 2 different spots. This is pretty a straightforward bass drum here, but it goes out to 2 different spots up here, one right to the mix, and then one over here to a slew limiter that I'm using as an envelope follower to create some side chaining here. So we can see, if I zoom out here, we can see what this looks like after it's been slewed. Kind of just tracing the amplitude of that. And then I took that out and sent it through this dual attenuator to turn it negative voltage, but then offset all the way up. So now I'm getting these dips every time I have that bass drum hit. And then I sent that out to the volume slider for all of my other channels besides my bass drum. So that's how I get the side chaining happening. If we turn on the other voice, if I mute this, you can hear it. So run by the actual sound of it. So when I mute the bass drum, it no longer side chains. So there you go. Hi-hat next down here. So hi-hat is also sequenced by this sequencer right here. Again, run by where is this coming from? These are my 16th notes as well, or these actually no, these are times 8. These are times 8 because this was when I realized I needed these triggers mode, because these gates on this sequencer stay high. They aren't like 50-50, and I don't see a way to, it's either all or none. So if I had 2 gates in a row, my hi-hat wasn't re-triggering. So at first I started just making it times 8 and then just going every other. Then I discovered I can do it in a trigger mode, which let me do these chances of actual like 30-second notes shoved in between these, which is fun. So again, this one is about probability now, because I'm taking these gates out. Again, to the mute first, and then also down here to this sample and hold, where I'm taking the pitch value that's showing how high these are up, and sampling that and sending it out to 2 different parameters of this. So it's being sent to the decay and also to the cutoff point of this. So it gives some movement to the hi-hat sound. So the the hi-hat hits that are actually more predictable, the higher probability ones, those ones, when they get hit, they're also going to have a little bit of a longer decay time, as well as have a slightly higher cutoff on the band pass that's in here. So I love this. I love when you can have easy probability of gates happening and stuff. And this does that with this gate output here. So next one I created was this guy, powered by this row here. A much slower clock, just coming right off of my main clock of quarter notes. You'll notice I have lots of it turned down here. These pitches going into the quantizer, coming down to a sample and hold. This is coming from the mute block. So when these trigger, it triggers a sampler and hold, which is going through an octavizer into another. I just had to duplicate the Instruo because I moved the coarse tuning knob around and I didn't feel like finding the exact spot. So I just duplicated it. It's the exact same one. Into the octave input, again, mixing 2 of them together, but this time mixing together into this filter here, because it's got both in and then a mix out. So I just messed with it that way. Again, these triggers coming from my mute group up top that are just this when they happen. These are probability, again, based on how high they are. Triggering these 2 attacks, one of them controlling my filter and one of them controlling my VCA as normal, going into another delay. So that's all 3 of these guys here. My main melody, my hi-hat, and this little extra thing that gets thrown in. The next one that I created was this guy here. A little more chaotic because this one is not using a sequencer to do it. It's all sample and hold for the pitches. So I'm getting my 16th notes in here. Yep, 16th notes coming into this random, which is creating my pitches, which are just being a bit attenuated and offset a little bit, sent over to my quantizer, and then back from my quantizer down to here into a slew limiter that again is getting some randomness into it to change every once in a while how much fall and rise there is. So the slew is changing, going into my TSL for the inputs being mixed together again as before, but a little bit different in just a moment that I'll explain. So that is the full mix of this is being, again, two different AD modules, one for the VCA, one being mixed together with the pitch information for the VCF. So the higher the note, the brighter the sound, but then also an envelope mixed into it as well to control the cutoff of the VCF. But in this one, what I'm doing instead of having it be four that are just completely mixed together, I've got this 4 LFOs down here from Bogue Audio that are offset from each other by kind of 90 degrees. And then those are being sent into the 4 CV inputs. So I'm actually getting the sound shifting slowly between these 4 wave types, fading them in and out. You can see there's kind of 2 of them that are bright and up at a time, and then they kind of fade out and go into each other. Kind of cool. And then I also took that same LFO to pan it. Going here, we'll just mute this guy for a second here. You can see it's panning this voice. And then after the main filter, so the sound panning between the different waveforms, going into the VCF, VCF's cutoff point by the pitch information as well as an envelope. And then that is being sent to the mixer, but also up here to this VCA that is being triggered by the main clock, and then making sure that it's not muted, making sure it's on the quarter note, and then just like a 25% chance this guy will kick off. So this envelope here, really slow delay, opens up the VCF, opens up this sound to go through this long delay that we hear. That's clocked by the thing as well. Only the wet going into this one here, so 25% chance every quarter note this will kick off, and we get this long delay tail. So just a fun motion for that voice. So again, in context. And again, I've performed all these with my MIDI buttons here on my Arturia Mini Lab Mark II. I had to change them over to switch mode rather than trigger mode, or I guess latch mode, or whatever it's called, so that my main buttons will mute and unmute these channels. But and then the final voice I made is kind of the strangest. I loved the idea of, I picked it up from Omri Cohen about using a delay as a voice if you have the time just right, and the feedback up enough. So what's happening here is we're getting a trigger from, again, through my mute thing of, let's see, where are you coming from? I'm not even sure anymore. My last one here is coming from, oops, that's two. Just coming from the 16th notes. So every 16th note coming in to trigger my random module set at 68%. That's triggering my delay, which is kind of just pinging the delay. The wet output from that then into the VCF and out to the mixer board. I'm mixing some white noise as well as an LFO together to control the VCF. And then the other thing is this time is actually being quantized through this fourth row of my sequencer. And I didn't know that this would work, but it pretty much stays in key, kind of. I tuned it to a happy note, and it worked. I was a little surprised that it worked as well as it did. So fourth row of the sequencer just being run pretty slowly here, sent out into the time input here, and then sent through the VCF with some white noise and an LFO doing that. And then the LFO is also kind of changing this feedback amount that kind of changes basically the decay time of this sound. The interesting thing to note about using a delay this way is that you don't have choice but slew because of how it's working, and it's the fact that it's a quick echo that's making the sound. When you change the time, you get that slewed sound there. There's no actual slew limiter in the thing here. It's just going straight from one note to the next. So yeah, there's that whole voice here. Kind of a little experiment that ended up working better than I even expected to. So that's pretty much it. And then plateau, of course, reverb on a lot of the voices as ascend. And yeah, a little bit of modulation on that. I'm not sure if it really makes a difference. I was just fiddling with it and I didn't get rid of it. So there you go. Time loop. Hope you enjoyed.